I would mention, and of course, the points that have come out here about collaboration and co-financing are key. But as a foundation, we can also, as the Christensen Fund does so beautifully, look for ways to not only make grants, but also provide capacity building opportunities, opportunities for our grantees to share their experience, to network with each other, to exchange with each other. So that kind of value added, I think, strengthens it. The other piece I'll put on the table, and it's such a huge and growing and exciting development in the foundation world, so I won't try to go into it too much, is mission-related investing, also known as impact investing. And that's when we in the foundation community ask, what are we doing with the other 95%? So what I mean by that is if you assume that a foundation on average gives 5% of their endowment value, we actually do more than that, but that's a rough figure. 95% of that endowment is sitting in investments. Well, what is it doing towards the mission? So mission-related investing is a very sophisticated way of maximizing your impact, and we're starting to do that in a small way, investing in groups like Root Capital, which do microfinance in countries where we're working, so that some of our endowment is actually being put to work not through grants, but through investments.
Thank you, Jessica. We could actually probably spend a whole panel on mission-related investing. Bruce, you've been dealing with a very, very large landscape and have been key in, and the Ivy Foundation, in spearheading the Canadian Boreal Forest Agreement. And it's considered, congratulations, to be the largest conservation partnership in the world. And how does that fit with this discussion of trends in environmental philanthropy?
Yeah, thank you, Lynn, and thanks so much for being here. I'm first of all reminded a great colleague of ours sadly died 10 days ago in a tragic accident, and he used to say, and in fact one of my favorite lines of his was that when you've met one foundation, you've met one foundation. And we can see that here today. Well, in terms of trends and the project that you're referring to, Lynn, when I started the Ivy Foundation 10 years ago, it's a 65-year-old family foundation based in Toronto, in Canada. And we were, very much a traditional foundation where we would receive applications. We had a focus on, in fact, the foundation's been funding conservation work for nearly 30 years. And it was very much a traditional foundation where you received applications from organizations all across the country, you reviewed them, and this one's good and this one's not so good, and we like those people, we don't like those people, and you make your decisions. And then as we began working on this very focused program on forest conservation over the last 10 years, we realized that in order to be effective, there's a few things we needed to have a real focus. And for us, focus meant working in the boreal ecosystem of Canada, which is a very large ecosystem. So just to give you an example, the agreement that you referred to, the Boreal Forest Agreement, covers a landscape that's twice the size of California, 8 times the size of Korea, and 18 times the size of Denmark for my Danish friends that I met here. So it's a very large landscape. And so if you can imagine our goal of trying to protect between 25 and 50% of that landscape will be a considerable conservation achievement. But really, I think what's most significant and perhaps the most important trend in that isn't so much the scale, it's the fact that that this agreement, which is between all of the major forest companies working in Canada and all of the major forest NGOs. So it essentially transformed the relationship between business and NGOs working on conservation in Canada from one that was very adversarial. And those of you may have recalled many years ago in Canada, there were campaigns against buying wood from clear-cut logging in British Columbia. The groups working on those campaigns, Greenpeace and I, was very, very effective. And the forest companies, frankly, just got tired of and worn down by these campaigns. And so this was an opportunity, and I guess just to mention the other trend, which is leverage. So this is an opportunity to leverage the forest industry to make huge conservation gains. But what it meant was both sides basically sitting down and the project was a negotiation over 2 years. And I should mention Pew Environment Group's been very involved in this as one of our funding partners. And basically, people had to set aside their historic disagreements and figure out, what they both valued. So, what was the value proposition for the conservation groups? What was the value proposition for the companies? And let's figure out a way to work together. So, the agreement really is nothing more than a protocol to work together to deliver results. But it covers climate change. It covers forest certification and forest practices and protecting endangered species. So it's a big agreement. We're very excited about it. But what it's meant for us is that we no longer receive lots of applications from people and try to figure out which ones we fund. We basically sit down with all the people that are working on this and say, so how much money do you need? And it's a very different way of doing philanthropy. And it's frankly, it's harder. It's much harder and much more difficult, personally difficult. Some of the decisions you have to make. But I think it's an emerging trend. And maybe the final quick point I'll just make is that it's very outcome oriented. So we would have never gotten where we were today using the traditional model of just receiving applications from people and hoping that they all end up conserving 78 million hectares of land. So that's it.
Yes, thank you. I gave Bruce the stop sign in Korean because he is probably the only person in this panel who has written a book that has been translated into Korean. And say a word about your wonderful book.
Well, it's called Slow Death by Robert Duck, and it's on the health effects of toxic chemicals. But it happily is just came out in Korea a few months ago.
And the title in Korean?
Slow Death by Robert Duck. Available on Amazon.
What's the title in Korea?
Korea is just Slow Death.
All right, very good. So thank you. Let's throw in this wonderful vegetarian context, let's throw a little red meat on the floor with a couple other topics and see who will jump on them from our panel. And since we've wrapped up this segment with Bruce and the great work that's been done to save the Canadian boreal forest, which is incredibly important from a climate change mitigation standpoint. You can't answer this question, James, because you've done your part. But in the face of increasingly sobering reports, Marcel referenced them, about the impacts of climate change and the intransigence of some of the governments, many of the governments, probably the U.S. First and foremost, in the thrall of the fossil fuel companies. What makes you believe that the programs that you're doing in your foundation are going to have any lasting difference on climate change mitigation? Who wants to jump in?
I would like to, but you won't let me.
Later.
So about 10 years ago, we took perhaps almost a strange decision at Christensen Fund that we were going to consider we were going to make our investments on the assumption that it was quite likely that we as society would fail to address the climate change dynamic successfully. And so we decided to invest instead, if you like, on trying to increase the capacity of resilience to adapt and change in key parts of the world that have been important in the long-term history of diversity on the planet, in its emergence and its rediffusion to other areas. Because it seemed to us that, firstly, there wasn't that much evidence we were going to succeed, and secondly, that a small foundation like ours, or somebody, some fraction of the percentage of all the effort spent on climate change, most of which needs to be on stopping it, but some small fraction of it needs to be on preparing for if we do not succeed. Because in terms of the long-term future, we need to have, we are, and we're now unfortunately 10 years on, we're seeing that we're already in the midst of that. We desperately need to increase the capacity socio-ecological systems, if you like, to adapt and cope and change, and not to lose key functions and key components. I mean, particularly you need those from a long-term point of view in those parts of the world, those regions of the world, which during past periods of major climate change, glaciation in Europe or whatever, have been the places where diversity best survived and from which it re-radiated. So if you took a many thousand several millennial view of diversity on the planet, you would invest, looking at the past, you would invest in certain locations as locations that sustain and generate biodiversity, and cultural diversity. So what I'm getting at here is that it's back to the point is that we need a diverse set of approaches. It's really fabulous all the creative ways that foundations are working, sometimes even at cross purposes, to try and find a way to stop climate change happening or to slow it down. But also we need to have, we try to reduce drunk driving, but we also recommend seatbelts, right? We don't rely only on stopping something. So,
Who else would like to weigh in on this?
Maybe just a comment on Ken's point about resilience, because of course I think all the things that go with resilience are essentially good for conservation and the planet. It's not just about climate change mitigation, but as we move towards resilience, we're really looking at a more holistic approach to conservation, one that builds on traditional ways of managing and taking care of natural resources and the earth, and incorporates questions of food security and livelihoods. And so resilience, I think, is a very, it's certainly an emerging term. I think it's a very helpful concept for us, and it's bigger than just adaptation.
And I would have to say we track the climate change mitigation and adaptation investments of the 15 largest foundations working in this area, and we've seen the adaptation resilience investments go up each year, as we've also seen the mitigation dollars go up as well. So let's return to another of our trends and ask folks to comment on what do successful business people know that make them good philanthropists, and what don't they know?
For those of you who have read my biography, in fact, chairing the foundation is my night job. During the day, I do other things, and in particular, I sit on the board of two publicly quoted companies in Switzerland. I have an MBA from INSEAD, which is the leading business school in France, in Europe even. I sit on the board of it as well, so I'm very what do business people do differently than normal people? For me, it already starts by a defense here. I mean, for years, conservation and business have been antagonistic. Now, that's, really, let's put that to rest. There's absolutely no reason for business and conservation to go the contrary. Now, to come back to what does a businessman do, or what does a successful businessman do, he's an optimizer. He's somebody, he or she, of course, is somebody who can make the most out of the three traditional scarce resources: time, money, and competence, talent. And which means recruiting the best people, which you get, to whom you give the best possible appropriate salary to do the best possible job. What's so different between this and conservation? If we really want to get success into any philanthropic project, including conservation project, we need to find the right people for the right job. And that, I think, is a quality, and maybe Adam, who does also spend an awful lot of his awake time doing business, can understand that thinking. We can bring this sort of pragmatic approach to the way conservation is being protected. Of course, it has limitations. I mean, the typical example is, why do we start protecting nature by putting a value on it? And there again, I'm going back to our discussion with Adam yesterday. Maybe it is worth saving nature because it is nature, and not only because it is worth something. And that, I'm sure, is a theme we can sort of discuss a bit more later. But just to finish my plurality for business, as long as you stay in a pragmatic environment, you should be able to make a difference.
And then Marcel and then Ed.
I think the question, if we think about what is a successful businessman, then some people might think it's just earning money. I do believe that when we finish our life and are asked the question, what did we do with it, it's not about how much money did you earn, but what did you do for all the stakeholders. And whatever you do, you have to take a holistic view. And when you live your life, you try to live it in such a way that you are an example for your children, that you pass on things, that you educate them, as Andre was saying, best possible way. So to be a successful businessman, it means taking care of people. It means business is a people's business. Philanthropy is a people's business. Whether the subject is then the environment or other aspects, it doesn't really matter. But it's you do everything with the same type of quality of talents, of the various inputs that we heard about.
Very good. Adam, and then Ken's chiming in too.
I think my day job, more of a speculator than a proper businessman. I think as a speculator, it's all about,
Go into the mic a bit more.
as a speculator, it's all about how much you don't know. And it's all based on knowing nothing. So you have to take information, reduce it, and then make a decision on it, and think about the risk and the reward of the situation. And then it's not about being right or wrong, it's about the consequences. So you don't need more science about amphibians. You know, for me, like frog in trouble, help frog. You know, it's not, you know, working group, we don't need more information. And it's not about, is climate change real? It's, if there's even a 5% probability that this happens, that's really bad. So we need to do something. So I think the thing that I was thinking of is a lot more emphasis here in other spheres about being right and not wanting to admit that you're wrong or making a mistake, which is sort of the starting point. Because your process is episode and you fail your way to success, and you don't get fixed to any single idea. So I think, and you don't need that much information to, thinking more about the risk reward or something rather than you have to be right. We need more science to prove it. I think that's the real.
I think that they've really captured the power of the strategic creativity of business, and as Andre explains, this is linked to their own accountability, and that's a wonderful thing. But needless to say, that also then becomes an Achilles heel in a certain way, because certain kinds of social change processes can only happen with accountability, with participation, with ideas, good and bad, coming from many places and not just from someone who can see the solution. So that, I think, it tends to be the creative tension between entrepreneurial philanthropy and these wider change processes. And of course, one great thing, and it's a trend in philanthropy, is that we're starting to collaborate. Those foundations that are really good about that kind of process, collaborating with entrepreneurial foundations, that can reach a solution. I think the risk factor is a really interesting one on that. We have I have a business person on our board, and one time he said, Ken, you can't convince me you're taking enough risk because you're not bringing enough failures. So we thought about this, and of course we think about the consequence of failure. Consequence of failure in a landscape ecosystem is different from the consequences of the failure of an individual product line. So that's another kind of really interesting way of thinking about how we play with risk. But it really needs to be underlined that the philanthropic landscape is being transformed by the emergence of this kind of new strategic entrepreneurial philanthropy, which in part reflects not only the continuing sort of concentration of wealth in the world, but the fact that wealth is often being concentrated at much younger ages, so that many people, even in their 30s, are becoming billionaires and are really wanting to explore supporting significant change in the world, and they're bringing a different kind of energy than people who do philanthropy after their retirement.
Thank you. This whole question of risk and failure leads us to one of our next questions, which again, you see kind of a changing universe within foundations about this. This whole question, let's talk a little bit about the plus and minuses of really being very focused versus a greater openness to ideas and projects.
Are you looking at me, Lynn?
Yes. Because I know you have feelings about this.
Yeah, I've spoken on panels on this. I think there is, of course, room for all of these approaches, and it's great for us to be able to work with organizations that have more flexibility. One of the downsides of being very focused is you feel that you miss out on opportunities to doing things that are slightly off focus, but very important. And one way that we sort of mitigate that at the Ivy Foundation is to create a pot of money that is actually an unfocused but related pot, so that we can just fund quickly things that we think are important, but not within the core programmatic sort of funding envelope. But I guess overall, the way my board of directors and the way I've worked in the past I find it hard to imagine how to work on something